All right. So I will flip to my whiteboard. And so I guess the discussion in terms of the Qigong practice is going to be this is going to be pretty down or kind of high, I don't know, but uh in terms of the layers, this is one of the more later layers of change in the system. So I thought I would just do a refresher on the basic categories or the basic layers of the system, which I will be using, of course, in clinic, assuming that a person is interested in Qigong, but obviously I'm going to offer this with the total scope of Chinese medicine, hence the name Qigong Fa. But all right, so counterbalance, basic alignment, and then I'll kind of define these a little bit, and that will give us an idea of where we are in the system, or the method, whatever we want to call it. I have actually added a sixth, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. Okay, so these are the basic categories or the basic layers in the Qigong Fa system. Let me see if anyone has messaged. Nope. Okay. I guess I'll let them know the room is open. All right, so basic alignment, and a lot of this should seem familiar. Lauren, if you have any questions, just type them out or holler at me and I can explain things further. Also, if it's helpful for your practice, in terms of what's the difference between these layers, I'll kind of go into that now though. So basic alignment, this is, I don't think that any step should be skipped necessarily, no matter who's coming into the system or the method, whoever wants to try it. But oh dang. But for some people, it's going to be a little bit quicker than others. Some people may spend more time in basic alignment, and some people may not. I guess it just depends. So basic alignment is a lot of, let's see, how can I explain this? It's, whoops. So it's coming back to the moment, and it's represented in one of our principles that we call presence. So a lot of people have, interesting ideas of what they think mindfulness is, or, what they think the present moment, which is a very static way of talking about it, what they think that is. So essentially, oh, so Donna, we're just outlining the system, so you haven't really missed anything because you know most of this, except for you don't know the new sixth layer. Yeah, there's always something. Okay, so basic alignment is underlined with the principle of presence, meaning every single thing in Qigong requires this. Does that make sense? So that's the reason it's the first layer of change. Even if somebody is like, even if Deepak Chopra was like, Ernest, I want to try Qigong Fa, I would like, please start with basic alignment. Like you're probably going to breeze right through it because you're already very present. But it's still the foundation of the practice and it needs to be thoroughly understood. Now, a lot of people talk about mindfulness, and this question was asked of me one time, and I don't use the word mindfulness in this practice anymore, so I'm slowly removing it completely. But what's the difference between mindfulness and presence? Aren't those the same thing? And of course, we've talked about this in depth. They're not. You can be present and then start labeling, judging, comparing, and contrasting everything around you because the threshold above or below active recognition can be very binary, but the direction that we're going towards or away from it is a pretty broad scope of degree, maybe infinite degree, if that makes sense. So we good there? So the basic alignment, this practice is, so what I was going to do, because I'm on break now, I'm going to make a Google Drive file and I'm going to put the Igong Fa books for this group to read through the Google Drive file. It makes it easier to share. So we already have basic alignment completely written out. There's maybe one or two things I'm going to add. And then of course you guys can make recommendations and suggestions on grammar and spelling and things because that happens. But so the first layer of change, so the core texts, every book that I call a core text are the layers. There are peripheral books that support Igong Fa. One is based around thought, the treatise on thought. What are some things that people aren't saying about the role of thought in our life? So that's just an example, but the core texts of Igong Fa and what I would compose the compendium out of is the introduction, which isn't really a core text, but I would include that in the compendium, sorry. But the first core text is basic alignment. So basic alignment is coming back to the present moment, using a lot of here I am, using a lot of reminders, whether it's note cards, whether it's people walking up to you that you know and giving you a gentle reminder. Let me get this McAfee. I do not want to run a scan McAfee. I want you to go away. Oh, I can't minimize. Okay, whatever. So the basic alignment layer of change is a person who has been well below the threshold of active recognition, behaving almost entirely on feedback loops. This is habit. Habit can start to progress, and the more it progresses, and it's usually below the threshold of active recognition, is the reason that it progresses. And the more we're below the threshold of active recognition, the faster and the stronger it progresses. But it can quickly or over time become attachment. And that attachment, of course, has degrees. It can be the kind of attachment that it's like, okay, you know, I do feel something now that this is removed from me, but I'm not losing my shit per se. But then we have the other type of attachment that's a degree that we're willing to fight, kill, and defend because we're so attached to these, whatever it is. And then we get into, and this is kind of just a way of looking at it. I don't want anybody to say that like this is a strict, it's just another concept, a way to look at things, organize things. But then I would get into addiction. And then addiction has the characteristic of having a physical component along with the psychological component, because technically an attachment could be entirely psychological. You can be attached to an idea, and then the physical component can come secondary. In a full-blown addiction, that physical component has to be addressed first. I'm not saying that you don't want to do a holistic approach, but you're not going to start with Igong Fa if someone is addicted to methamphetamines. You know what I mean? You're going to start with treatment. In addition to Igong Fa.
Too much interference. There's no space for.
Oh God, yeah. And it's a strong physical interference in addition to the psychological, but the physical comes first, if that makes sense. Okay, so any questions about the first layer of change? And so the first book is just full of basic strategies to simply become present, and that's all you're doing. That is the first layer of change. If a person comes to me and they're like, well, Ernest, how do I know if I'm ready to move on to the next layer of change? I would say, well, ask some questions about it. Like, what do you think it is? Or what do you want to know? How is your practice right now? Maybe I ask some questions, because sometimes when you tell someone to ask you questions, they clam up. Have you ever seen that in classrooms? Like everybody has all these questions and the teacher's like, any questions? And nobody says a word. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, literally 2 minutes ago, everybody had a question, if not 5. Now all of a sudden the teacher's asking and I gotta be the one. And then of course I raise my hand and pose my 5 questions. So any questions about that? Really simple. The book is very just throwing techniques at you to become present. And so the second layer of change used to be associated with the word mindfulness, but because that has become a buzzword that has no clear definition in people's minds, I use the word mind intention. That is also the definition of E. At least one way of looking at E in Igong is mind intention, the intention of your brain, your being, not just your brain, of course, your whole body. So the second layer of change in the Igong system is called counterbalance. And again, we never stop doing this. Spoiler alert, there is no such thing as static balance in the perspective that we're talking about. Maybe not even in any sense, because the atoms are always moving. You can look at a scale and you would say, well, this is relatively balanced, but I promise there's things moving around and doing different things, and electrical charges changing inside of a molecule and inside of an atom, and there's some counterbalancing occurring in the orbit around the atom, that probability cloud. So if we want to look at it on the smallest of smalls, counterbalance is a constant thing. And that again fits with yin yang theory, that yin and yang are counterbalancing one another, and they're always changing and moving. They're never at 50%. And even if you did look at it at 50%, the ancient Chinese have already addressed that with the yin inside yang and the yang inside yin, emphasizing that there's always that contextual opposite emerging from within the other. So Eckhart Tolle might start talking about the silence behind the sound. You could say that the sound is yang and the silence is yin. I'm just assigning these arbitrarily, but one will be emerging into the other, and then the other will be emerging into the one, and it's this constant dance. Does that make sense? Not chaos, necessarily. So counterbalance is now, I guess the best way to say this is the redirection principle, and this is the rule of three. And I guess I didn't put it in parentheses up there, so I won't here. And this is the principle of redirection. And the way the technique, the tool that we're using in the redirection technique is mind intention. And so the reason that Igong is not psychology, like it's not a psychological practice, it's not psychotherapy, it's not a type of therapy whatsoever, because all we're doing is recognizing that we're below the threshold of active recognition, which I'm sure this just crossed Donna's mind. In doing so, we are above the threshold of active recognition. The moment you recognize that a moment ago you were below, you have become above, and that's a part of this process. That's counterbalance, you know, one above, one below. It's a thing. So redirection, the second Igong book, which you'll be able to read in the Google file for free, of course, and then I would love feedback, and misspellings and all that is really great, but that book is also finished. And this book is called The Tai Chi Mind, because we're taking the principles of Tai Chi and applying them to our cognition, which I didn't invent that idea. When you look at Wayne, so it's called The Essence of Tai Chi, and most people refer to it as the Tai Chi Classics. Or the most popular interpretation of the Tai Chi classics. He begins the book with Tai Chi as a way of life. All these people talk that Tai Chi is a martial art or Tai Chi is a health system. That's cool, but the person who is like the authority in translating the Chinese texts of Tai Chi define Tai Chi as a way of life. And this is a way of interpreting that and activating that and working with that. And so I'll just describe the basic principle and then we'll move to the next layer. But the basic principle is that we don't want to meet even our own mind with force on force, because it's your own mind. What are you doing? Like, who are you talking to? What's going on? Let's really look at this with some logic. Force in your own mind is one of the least efficient things that a human being could do with their energy and their life experience. It's interference, and it just doesn't make any logical sense. So rather than using, and this of course applies in Tai Chi with physical force, somebody is trying to punch you in the face, and that's, you know, it's a principle. A principle should have you should be able to see aspects of the principle in both psychological and physical and idealistic. And, you know, we're looking around in the world and we should be able to see footprints of principle everywhere. Otherwise, it's probably not a principle. It's just a concept that we've made up, and more observation is necessary, perhaps. So this principle of redirection is that we don't want to meet force with force, but we also don't want to do what we have been doing for most of our lives, and that is passivity. Passivity, look at this, becomes a habit, and the habit becomes more habit, and that's a degree, and then more habit, and then more habit, and then more habit, and then it becomes an attachment, and then we become attached to the thoughts. We start to identify with them. We start to think that that's the only way to interact with our world, and then we become bored or otherwise at odds with the world around us, and we require constant stimulation because it has moved into addiction. The human being is now physically addicted to thought. Does that make sense? And this is occurring below the threshold of active recognition.
Well, you just illustrated below the threshold of recognition 2 degrees. And so with addiction at the extreme degree.
Yeah,
And I do consider it a kind of, not therapy, but how it can be equated is it's behavioral, even though it's not physically behavioral. Redirection of the mind, remembering, is a practice. It's a doing. It's an activity. So it is behavioral change. To me, it's
Oh, it is.
behavioral change. Yeah. So that's therapy. Behavioral therapy is redirection. Yeah.
You could look at it that way, but let's say somebody had frozen shoulder and they went in to get therapy. They would likely, depending on who they see, if you see, biomedicine or a medical doctor, a typical medical doctor in the US, they would treat the frozen shoulder or try to treat the frozen shoulder. And then if you go to a holistic practitioner, they're going to say, let's look at the whole body, our lifestyle, everything, and see how that can affect the frozen shoulder and it never come back, hopefully, is also one of the holistic approaches. Is treatment leads to prevention if you can't just do prevention to begin with. So this frozen shoulder exists, but we're still getting therapy for the frozen shoulder, right? Ultimately, in both examples, we're getting treatment for the discomfort of the frozen shoulder, which was the catalyst for us going to see either the holistic doctor or the biomedical doctor. Bottom line. So that's kind of the same thing. That's not Igong Fa at all, because I will never, in a one-on-one, if you ask certain questions, I would, because you're asking me questions. But Igong Fa as a system never addresses these individual things. It's just a way to direct your mind intentionally above the threshold of active recognition. Behavioral change will be just a result. It will happen, but it will never really be. Actually, we're going to talk about that today. That's kind of the gist of where we were going to go with the abstract principles. So let me get there. But that's the difference. So we can in a kind of way talk about it and say, yeah, of course, it's therapy. I'm feeling better. It's therapeutic. I feel soothed and refreshed, and yeah, but it's not therapy at the same time. Does that make sense? Because you'll also
It's behavioral therapy.
no.
Redirection of your mind is not behavioral.
No, because
change?
we're not necessarily, no, it is behavioral change. Behavioral change is different than the word behavioral therapy, especially in a setting, medical setting.
Oh, I'm not comparing it to Western medicine. I'm just
I
saying
always,
context of how I frame it. It's a
how
huge
you
change
frame
in
it's
my
cool.
behavior.
Yeah.
Not
yeah,
what I
absolutely.
do, just what I do with my mind is behavior change.
Sure, but if I were talking about this in a professional setting or in a contextual setting where somebody is asking me, what is Igong Fa? I will never say it's therapy. I would say it could be infinitely therapeutic, but it's not necessarily therapy, not in the way that it's used in the medical world, right? Does that make sense? Of course it's therapeutic. Like, of course we're going to get to our behavior because we're getting to the root. Like we're not addressing the individual branches, which is what therapy does. This has a lot of the components and the feeling of therapy, but it's like if you go to a therapist, they're going to say, well, how you feeling? What's going on? What's wrong? I don't care in Igong. Igong, be present. When you're not present, go back to present. Do you see what I mean? So it is a method, it is a practice, like Donna said, and it can be added to any type of therapy that a person is currently undergoing, whether that is holistic therapy and treatment, or it is other types of therapy and treatment, like maybe PT or even medication for a disease, something that they're experiencing. But that is a clear line that I have to draw, that Igong Fa is not therapy, because Igong Fa is kung fu for your mind. It's like in some senses they call it I Chuan. That's actually an entire martial art, but I Chuan, Yiquan, is martial. It means mind fist, basically. So again, this is not categorized as therapy. This is within the scope of practice of anybody who does it. Does that make sense? That's another key characteristic. Somebody who's delivering therapy, they don't necessarily have to be doing it themselves. Igong Fa, you do. If you share this with another human being to some degree, this has to be something that you value and you do yourself.
Well, you can't teach it if you're not speaking from some kind of experience.
Yes, right. And it's also hard to respect a person when it's like, and again, everybody's doing it to degrees, and there is no image of perfection in Igong. That's why it's not a religion, So I do have these, and I'm not going to write about it right away. What is Igong not? Igong is not a religion. It has no gurus. It has no masters. It has no supreme entity whatsoever. It has no you shoulds, other than where is your mind and did you put it there? Where is your mind, or do you even know? What are you doing with your attention? That's Igong Fa. That's literally it. Okay, so in the redirection technique, we are redirecting thought, and thought that is repetitive, thought that is habitual, thought that is not making us feel well, or just thought because it's occurring and it might not be necessary for your current circumstances, right? Maybe you're in a social situation where you really want to connect with the people at hand, but your mind keeps thinking about the test that you have next Tuesday. And you're like, well, there's nothing wrong with thinking about the test next Tuesday, but I don't want that right now. So there's all kinds of reasons that a person could surmise to do Igong, but the underlining reason is to be above the threshold of active recognition as often as we possibly can. And I can explain why that would still be balanced. Someone could say, well, Ernest, isn't being present all the time a form of imbalance? No, because your mind also has an automatic below the threshold of active recognition all the time anyway. Some people refer to that as the subconscious. I would begin to refer to it as below the threshold of active recognition that your mind is doing all the time. It is constantly processing your environment, just like your heart is beating, without your awareness of it necessarily. So that will always be there. And if you're present all the time, balance. So squash that pretty quick, actually. And they were like, oh, well, fuck, good answer. They thought they had me too. They're like, Ernest, isn't that an imbalance? Santina, did you unmute?
Yep, I have a question.
Yes.
So yesterday you had posted active listening.
Yes.
That was fantastic. Now,
Oh,
how
good.
can you be in complete active listening?
Yeah.
And be in, and be in your attention.
Mhm.
I mean, it's almost the same thing, isn't it? Active listening and having your mind focusing your attention completely.
What's the question? I'm sorry. I'm not sure.
No, it's not a question.
Oh.
How can you put those two together for me? Active listening and what you're talking about right now.
Okay, let's say that you want to
So-
actively listen to me and you start thinking about the test next Tuesday.
Mhm.
You're no longer active listening. You would want to use the redirection technique of the rule of three to bring your mind back to the present. I would probably outline those elements of active listening, and I would say, Ernest, you must be present to actively listen, and that requires connection. You must join, you must stick, you must adhere. And now I'm back. And anytime my mind would potentially start to go away from that, I would counterbalance and bring it back. I could bring it back to breath. I could bring it back to my body, because I can pay attention to both, because paying attention to my body doesn't require words. If I ever have my words and trying to listen to your words, I can't do both efficiently. Does that make sense? Because
yeah, that's what is confusing me, because if you're active listening, you're
Yes.
allowing those the words of someone else coming into that space, and
That's
that's
true.
where it's kind
That
of
is true.
hard.
Yeah, you're
Mhm.
absolutely right. So now,
However, you can maintain your rule of three, your points of
yes,
attention,
Mhm.
because those are wordless.
right.
So your feet on the floor, your breath,
Yeah,
so that's how you're practicing your practice,
while
making
listening.
space, and you can still join, stick, adhere, connect.
Yeah, very
Perfect.
nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in the active listening example, I was listening to the interaction between you and Donna. Simultaneously, I was aware of my breath, my body in space and time, and I was
Mhm.
aware of the feeling of chi moving through my body. And
Mhm.
I get it. And actually, I could talk about that today in hydrostasy because I have what I call the 4 directions of attention. These
Mhm.
are directions of attention that can be maintained simultaneously because they don't cross streams. You
Mhm.
can't think 2 thought streams in words at the same time because they cross streams. Like
Right.
it's using the same areas of the brain on top of the same areas of the brain, and our brain just doesn't do that very well. There's a lot of research to show that multitasking doesn't really exist. It's micro going back and forth. It's micro shifting, that we're rapidly going back and forth. That's when those things cross streams, because it can't do anything else than rapidly go back and forth unless we're doing different aspects of our cognition simultaneously, such as aware of your body in space and time and your breath. You can do both of those right now. You can feel your body, there it is, and you can breathe at the same time and listen to me, because those are operating on different, I call them in the Qigong practice, different directions of attention. And I only do 4 because you don't need more than that. Like you can add 5 if you want to get clever, like with the squatting of the 4 modes. That's kind of an in-between standing, and that's cool. I love creativity and having little, caveats. I think that's cool. But in general, it's going to be those. It's going to be 4 directions is enough. And I'll get into that actually as we start to define the system, because that's a key element. So warrior training. So actually I'll say the practice can stop there. In fact, I would really recommend a person evaluate whether they want to continue, because a person will benefit immeasurably with presence and redirection alone. Does that make sense?
Yes, and you kind of have to get some, because I remember starting warrior training and I was bouncing back and forth, because you kind of have to get some practice and momentum going with counterbalance
Yes,
before you can really um, understand and apply warrior training.
absolutely. Because, okay, and I'll explain that. So if somebody came to me and we were in a one-on-one and they say, Ernest, well, how do I know if I'm ready to go on from this layer of change of counterbalance to warrior training? And so I would either have to prompt some questions that kind of get questions going back at me, because we need questions. That's kind of how I would see where we're at. I'm not going to judge you and evaluate you in ways that you didn't agree to. I think that consent is really important. So I'm going to ask questions to try to evaluate, and because you asked me the question, where are you now? So if I asked you those questions, so one of my questions would be like, so Donna's like, Ernest, how do I know? And I would say, all right, well, what were your point of attentions today? And what were your strategies? And, what did redirection look like for you today? And she'd say, Ernest, what are you talking about? Like, I feel good and I didn't do any of my practice today. And I would say, I'm sorry, warrior training might not be where we should focus. Maybe we should go back to focusing on coming back to the present moment and redirecting whenever we're not. Redirecting to what? Not behavioral therapy techniques or anything. We're redirecting back to the present moment, and we're using breath and body and words and mantras to do that. We have tools to do that. Does that make sense? Now, if I ask that same question to Santina and she says, well, here's my list, and she pulls a list out of her pocket. She's like, these are all the points of attention that I have intended in advance today. I've had to redirect several times. It was coming in and out, and I didn't like the weather, and I started to complain, and I had to remind myself, complaining actually doesn't make the weather any different. It doesn't improve a damn thing. So I had to use a logical statement to remind myself to gently come back to my body and my practice, and to appreciate the fact that I'm fucking alive. You know, yeah, it's humid outside, but I could be dead and not experiencing humidity, or I can be alive and finding a way to enjoy the opportunity to exist. That could be a mantra, or I call it the voice of logic. Also, by extension, that is the voice of power. That's a different discussion, though. That's a technique. I would say, okay, Santina, I'm just going to ask a couple more questions, because it sounds like you're doing your practice. It sounds like you're redirecting, but why do you want to move on to this layer of change? It's going to be a little bit more, no force still, but it's going to be more focus. It's definitely going to take things up a couple notches. The answer would be the unbending desire to feel peace. That's kind of the definition that we've defined. And there could be lots of ways for a person to describe that. But that's what it boils down to, is there has to be an unbending desire. The desire has to be so strong that you are willing to redirect whenever your mind is going away from the present moment. And you'd be like, well, haven't we done that already? Yes, but we're really going to define it now. We're going to redirect our mind whenever we compare, contrast, try to figure it out, try to think ourselves through problems, or through, we might even call them problems, but challenges that we need to adapt to when we are trying, did I say trying to figure things out? Yeah. Which one's comparing, contrasting, trying to figure it out? Ultimately, it comes down to thinking about yourself. How often, when you're thinking, does it relate directly to the construct of self, your likes, your dislikes, your current personal experience, things that are, oh yeah, the other one is future and past. Whenever you're thinking in psychological time, that requires redirection. So if you're doing warrior training, you're going to start doing some deliberate, informal practices. That's really when we kick up the 4 modes. So I'm going to say, all right, this is the 4 modes. Whenever you're standing, where is your mind and did you put it there? Whenever you're in motion, where is your mind and did you put it there? Whenever you're sitting, where is your mind and did you put it there? Whenever you are vertical, laying down, where is your mind? Where are your techniques? Is your mind deliberate? The answer is yes or no. If it's no, it's now yes, because we just talked about it. And I know you would have brought your attention back to the moment just by simple cues. It'll begin to occur that way. So does that make sense? Anytime you're thinking about yourself or another person, redirect your mind back to your practice. That's your note card. That's your object of power. That's your voice of power. That's your soothing tool within the moment. Like I use my little roller. There's so many things that we can use to bring us back to our above the threshold of active recognition state of existence. Why? Because we should be. It is know thyself. It is the human being aware of being a human being. Some people call that metacognition. That's just how we should be existing. We shouldn't need a phrase, metacognition. But now I'm getting on a rant. I can go places.
I have an example.
Okay.
I have recently got a diagnosis that would probably send most people off the rails. And it's amazing to me how many things have lined up that should have taken 7 weeks to get to this point in terms of structuring of doctors and tests and a plan and all of that. And it's happened within a 2-week period, even less. It directly as a result of my practice. There's no doubt about it in my mind that all of these things have fallen into place, which gives me such a sense of calm and assurance, and I am co-creating with the universe feeling. And there was one nurse in particular who was trying to reassure me, and she's a rock star. Nurses should run the world, but that's another rant. And she was trying to reassure me about that everything's going to be okay in medical terms. And I thanked her and I said, those aren't the things that upset me. What I am concerned about is making sure I get frustrated, and I recognize this is the know thyself part of it. I get frustrated when the medical community and the medical system in is so inefficient. This, you have to make sure that this test gets to that person and that person read it and it gets to the next person. And I don't want to be involved in that. I want I want to be the patient, and I want you to do all that stuff. I want somebody else to do their job efficiently. So I can, and I, in my mind, so I can practice. So I'm not distracted from my practice. I don't want to be thinking about the words of all those things and keeping a calendar of all those things. I want them to do that. And I just want to show up while I'm, you know, um, giving my body everything it needs to find balance. And I don't want to occupy my mind with all of those words. I'm okay to have a conversation with you about it, make some decisions. We're on the same team, but I want to be me while you guys be you. I've been a nurse long enough. I don't want to be my own nurse. I want to be in my practice. And she said, well, that's my job. I mean, I found this nurse on day one. Like, it was just incredible. And everything I thought, gee, I think I would go to this clinic if my tests are positive. And that my neighbor works at that clinic for 20 years. I mean, it just all fell into place. And so I have someone who's doing all those thought-based, scheduling-based things, so I can go back to my practice with the least amount of interference as possible, reduce my words, continue my practice. I can have a conversation with them. I can engage, I can join the conversation, I can stick, I can adhere, I can connect, and then I can let go of it when that's done and be able to trust that I can go back to my practice fully without having to keep a whole bunch of things in my head. And so that's my example of what I think you just explained. It's what I've personally experienced, that is that balance for me.
Yeah, and then plus you need to conserve energy in case there are treatments. You're the one going through the treatment, so
Oh
that
yeah, so I could go to the supermarket and buy all
Right.
the foods and do
Right.
the things and focus on without words. I don't really need to, I could look up a couple of things, get some information, and then go back to my practice. And the behavior kind of takes care of itself if I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Least amount of interference, and also not me being the center of the universe, just my organism in as much flow and the least amount of interference as possible. And then where there is interference, that will come into play, and whether I address that medically or homeopathically, or none of that has to be determined. It all does not have to be determined in this moment. It will unfold, and I will make those micro adjustments as they come. Right now, I'm in my practice, and it's really helped me. I don't know how to explain this. Other people might think it's a horrible thing, but it's really helped me to keep my practice pristine, because death is an advisor. And how do I want to live my moments is like, oh, you could, I'm up in the game, in terms of my practice, which is, the benefit is luminous. So I really have no complaints, but I see all the principles that you're describing right now, even more so because of it.
Yeah, death can really, or the advisor of death, even if it's not like somebody doesn't have to get a mortal that type of diagnosis. It's just any type of diagnosis sometimes reminds a person that they are a carbon-based biological entity and they are bound to disperse just as they have aggregated. Yeah. Okay. As I think the way that you're relating to the specifically like warrior training and how it can affect a person or be therapeutic in a situation like that, like I can completely relate to that. That makes a lot of sense. So any questions about the warrior training section? There'll be some more formal practice introduced. And then there'll be a lot more clear parameters to redirect so that people can kind of back up the degree that they're attached to themselves. And when I say self, that has a very defined term. It is actually all of it, but we're looking at the physical entity. We're looking at our likes, our dislikes, our memories, our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations, our name, the things that belong to us, desires, probably said that one. So all of those things make up the self. And then the more that you do this practice, you realize that self can actually be extended to everything. And that's the luminous state, when you're seeing and feeling that. But I don't want to skip ahead because that is coming up. All right, so now so I'll put the arrows for warrior training so I have a good whiteboard to share. And over here, I'll write unbending desire to feel peace. I'll just put unbending desire. No, I won't. To feel peace. That makes more sense in case someone's reading this. And I will erase this little, oh, no, not that. No, not that. Okay, this little arrow over here. Dang it. Okay, I can't get this little arrow to go away. So warrior training was specific rule of 3 / more intense. It is more intense. Like there's just no getting around that. I know everybody wants everything to be easy with no intensity and just, easy enlightenment, but I don't know anything about that. I know that this.
Could you please differentiate the rule of 3 between a more specific rule of 3 that you're describing?
Sure. Intense. There's really no difference, other than your understanding experientially with it. So at the point of warrior training, you are really familiar with all this. You know what is involved with redirection and being present. So you know what you're getting into when I tell you we're going to be even more specific about this, even to the point where you will stop eventually creating thoughts about, or less thoughts about yourself all the time. So there's really, I would say that warrior training is just an extension of basic, or the counterbalance, except for at this point, we have really experienced it. We know there's a knowing there. That's why a person would want to go on, because they know that this is helping. Like this is waking something up inside of them that in most people has gone into atrophy. And I'm actually going to get to that, because Igong Fa, I did not invent that term. There's a reason why a lot of, like Donna said, everything just seems to come together in really fascinating ways. I bought things 2 years ago that you kind of collected, and I'm like, I don't know when I'm ever going to, a lot of those things, if not all of them, are now useful to me now. And I'm like, well, shit, that's just in my closet. Like, I just need to go get that. And I have that thing I need for this thing I didn't think I would need, but now I need. And it's just amazing how, and we could go into all kinds of fancy words and memes, and everything is working out for me in law of attraction, but we don't need to. I can go into all of that, but that might get into a little bit of a tangent. Okay. So the principle, and actually, if we look at 1, we have started with presence. Whoops. And you can see where that presence, you can see where that's represented. And 2, mind intention. And 3 is redirection. And those are represented strongly in the first 3 layers. Does that make sense? So we're still in redirection, more intense. We're still in redirection. We're always in redirection, but we haven't really started to introduce the next 3 pillars. All right, so same question. Ernest, how do I know whether I want to do hydrostasy? There's going to be a book. And like I said, I'm going to have a Google Drive everybody can read and evaluate for themselves, and then give me feedback. So you'll have access to all of this very soon, because I'm on break. And it doesn't have to be finished either. You can see it as I'm working on things. But if the question is posed, I would have a very clear answer. Are you maintaining a point of attention all day long or most of the day? If the answer is no, let's just back it up a little bit, because you're probably still thinking about yourself a lot. Does that make sense? That's it. That's the defining characteristic. Are you able to maintain a deliberate point of attention all day long? Or most of the day? Because how do we quantify it to a certain extent? Especially quantify it to another person, because if you forgot, you forgot, and you forgot that you forgot. So yeah, we're not looking for absolutes here. Does that make sense? Simple question, simple answer. I don't have to ask a lot of questions. It's really just that one. Are you able to maintain a deliberate point of attention, be it body awareness? Maybe breath. If it's breath, then you're going to feel a whole lot of peace in your life experience. If you're aware of every single breath that you take without manipulation and control, it gets really, really peaceful in that example. If you had tried to do that before presence, mindfulness, and warrior training, you would be trying to counterbalance using a meditative approach, and it very likely wouldn't be hugely successful, which is why almost nobody meditates. And the people that do meditate are meditating so that they can take pictures and tell people that they meditate. So other characteristics of the next layer of change that I call hydrostasy. Hydrostasy begins to introduce the next two pillars of the practice, and they're the primary techniques. And I call these, I'll put it on the whiteboard. It always does that. Sensing energy. Now, the conversation starts to change in hydrostasy, because what's there if not interference? That's a question. What do you guys think? What is there in your experience, in your mind, in your cognition, in your life, if not the repetitive habitual space? Absolutely. And that's actually one of my highest, most important critical techniques, is when that space occurs, engage it. Put your attention there. If I dropped out of the sky and said, Lauren, where's your mind now? And you said I was engaging the space between thoughts, I just actually got to chill. Just even imagining somebody giving me that answer. That's the answer. Great answer, Lauren. Yeah, so we have created space in the overall volume of thought, the amount of thought from the time that we wake up, from the time that we go to bed, we have created space. What comes from that space that we've created in repetitive habitual cognition that doesn't make us feel well, doesn't directionally point us towards inspiration and creativities, and ultimately harmony physically? If we're not currently harmonious physically, there's actually no such thing as perfect harmony physically. That's another myth. We create images of perfection that get us really confused about the universe and ourselves and how we relate to everything else. So there's no finite fixed point that somebody is healthy. I'm healthy. I'm the epitome of perfect health. Are you sure? Let's look on a cellular level, because I bet cells are dying and new cells are being replicated. I can promise that's occurring. And there's no such thing as a detox. Your blood always has toxins. That's its job, is to move toxins out of your body. So it's never a moment in your entire life experience ever, from the time that you're born, from the time that your body can no longer sustain your consciousness, did your blood not have a toxin in it. Period. So what is detox? Okay. Moving on. Hydrostasy is felt. That was another way that we could look at this answer. We have created space, which means that we're feeling our body, we're feeling our emotions, we're aware of our own cognition, our own thoughts, our own behavior. We're also now keenly aware of which behaviors are making us feel well. And then the thought occurs, Ernest, you need to check. Wait a second, I don't need to do a damn thing other than be present and to be deliberate with my attention above the threshold of active recognition. That's all I need to do. So I'm not even going to go into thoughts about how do I fix things and how do I make myself better and how do I drop these habits and how do I have this behavior. Again, that's why this can't be classified in the Western medical sense as therapy, because this is getting to the root of the underlying dysfunction and disharmony and harmonizing it. Again, harmonizing does not mean static. It means if you imagine harmonizing in terms of music, you have two different people. Maybe they're kind of on different paces and they have different tones and things like, and now we bring them together so it sounds like music, whereas before it just sounded like noise. That's harmonizing, but they're still kind of in a tango with one another to maintain that harmony. Does that make sense? So in hydrostasy, we are able to feel that oscillation that Donna's talking about. And I draw this picture of a line with a circle and a dot in the middle, and we're constantly kind of going back and forth, but we are keenly aware now. We feel it when we're going out of balance. Maybe we're eating too much cake. For me, at a point, it was smoking cannabis. I can't do that anymore. I don't smoke cannabis because it just rapidly takes me outside. Interacting with coffee or interacting with entertainment or interacting with sexuality and my biology, I am now keenly aware of which thoughts, which behaviors, which emotions, which actions around me take me to or away from my center of balance, and that is hydrostasy. We start navigating the present moment based on and again, I'm not going to evaluate your balance. If you ask me questions, I'll answer the best I can. Maybe I don't have an answer at all. I don't know. So I'm not going to try to evaluate your balance because I just teach Qigong. I don't do cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'll teach you Qigong and explain how that relates to cognitive behavioral therapy if you're also doing that with a licensed therapist or whatever, or your life coach or whatever is going on. I can relate Qigong to that, but I do have limitations on how I will answer certain questions because I'm not defining this as therapy. I'm defining it as an art for your mind because it's wildly creative. Hopefully, if I ask 10 people, what are your points of attention today? We're going to get some differentiation. And even if they're the same technically, how you experience them in your present moment is going to be different because you're in two different present moments. So if Donna says my point of attention is light and Santina says my point of attention is light, if both of you described that right now, it would be different because the light is, you're experiencing it differently. That's the unique nature of perception, individual perception. So in hydrostasy, we are and you can look at this in the world, we would call this emotional IQ. We would be aware of our own behavior. Some people would call it metacognition because we are now aware of our own mind as it's occurring because you are maintaining a point of attention all day long, which some people are going to listen to this and I'm like, that's impossible, Ernest. I'm going to be like, yes, fine. Okay. I'm going to go talk to people that are doing this practice and know that it is possible. That makes sense? And I have not leveled up. I have not transdimensionally alpha Lions Gate, anything like that. None of that is a part of the system whatsoever. In fact, that's what I love so much about how I have created the next layer of change, which I haven't actually talked about. So this is, if it were a bigger group, then they would be introduced to it as well together. But this is the first time that I've ever really talked much about the abstract principles. Okay, so let me first draw my arrows. And this is feeling the space, feeling and engaging the space, let's just say feeling the space. That's what I do when I can't spell a word and I don't have spell check. I just use a different word. So feeling the space, navigating based on that feeling. And guess what? I'm still doing basic alignment because presence never went away. I'm still doing counterbalance and warrior training because if I start thinking about myself or I start thinking about my habits and I start thinking about, when you go through a medical profession, you have the potential trap of over-evaluating yourself. And I'm not falling into that trap, but I've seen it. I've seen it because I'm doing my hydrostatic practice. I can feel myself starting to think about, Ernest, do you have liver blood heat deficiency? And it's like, oh, fuck. Oh, what do I need to change? And then I'm like, oh, no, wait a second. Thinking about it isn't going to help it, even if it's there. And I'm not going to most likely just instantly change behaviors just because I think I should. Death as your advisor can be a catalyst, though. But that's a little different. So, yes, Donna, did you have something?
I was going to say, not only Jeff being an advisor, but that's true, is that, you know, as a result of practicing, I and navigating life circumstances with a practice in place, is that when life circumstances get louder and involve more words, I immediately think of adaptation. Okay, for this extended period, it's like just do energy almost. For this period of time, I'm going to engage in more converse, like you do it for class. I'm going to engage in more words, more conversation, more. However, my practice is still here, and that's where the yin and yang balance changes a little bit. But I am, if I am rooted in my practice, then I'll recognize when I'm in an extreme for too long and need to further adapt. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
So therefore, that's what I meant before when I said this nurse is a rock star. I can say to her, this is what I need you to do. All that word stuff, all that organization stuff, because I recognize that I want my practice and creating space and engaging the space to be my priority at this point, because I intuitively feel that's what's required. And I will keep tabs on the research and my decisions and, you know, the plan, but I would like you to handle as much of that as possible. And they do. It's just amazing that they are. That's the most surprising thing to me, is that the world is responding to that, because I really am clear about that's what I want. I get a text about my next appointment. I get a call 2 seconds later to confirm the appointment. Like, everybody's on top of it, and I don't need to think about it.
You don't.
But for the moment, I need to think about it. And I don't lose my practice as a result of it, which is great. It's just amazing.
Mm-hmm. And then we do have the term that we call maximizing or optimizing. You know, our current situation may not be ideal, but our practice will always optimize it.
And I don't even have to judge it as ideal or not ideal. I am choosing to engage with these people who are going to offer me something, and I will have a choice about that. Just like your school, you know, all the studying and the memorizing and all of that requires a lot of words, a lot of attention. It takes up physical time. And so your practice needs to adapt to that. It doesn't disappear, but you adapt what your previous schedule was, your routine was. It's behavioral. Your behavior has adapted to what you're choosing from this school and the information and the process. And I'm looking at my process, all the principles are very similar, and it takes a lot of the I don't have a lot of baggage associated with it, which would be easy to do as a nurse. It would be easy for me to get, you know, caught up in all the what ifs and trying to control. And I'm really not interested in doing that at all. It doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I could spend the next 2 hours giving you examples of that adaptation, because the catalyst of being in, you know, a doctorate or a graduate program, you know, that's a lot of change. That's a lot of rapid change. How did I adapt to some of those things? And I can give you, you know, examples.
And lots of words, lots of things that would seem counterproductive to your practice, or at least in my former belief system, in my resistance thinking, was that, okay, the practice is over here and the world is over here, and they're so far apart. And that was how I entered this. How do I you know, how do I bring it together? And this and these phases of change are actually how you Igong Fa is how you do it. Yep.
Yong's fine. Ingong's fine. Or you can call it tea. You can call it whatever you want.
Yeah, I call it gobbledygook when I'm talking to my
Yeah,
family because
'cause
otherwise
it
they
doesn't.
get all
Yeah.
judgmenty about it.
You can call it mind fist and see what they think. Now, so just to, I guess, to clarify, because I don't think I mentioned it though, is that in hydrostasy, we created space, which gives us the opportunity to perceive the world around us in ways that we may have never felt before. New ways, because where is your mind? It's paying attention to the present moment and you're sensing, and I call that sensing energy. In Tai Chi or in Chinese medicine or in Chinese culture, this is called Ting Jing, or our ability to basically listen, pay attention, and perceive through our senses. In a martial arts, it's you're sensing the world through touch. In this example, you're sensing the world by clearing your mind and allowing your energy body and your physical body to perceive the world around you. And that perception is felt. Not you may think words about it, you may not. But fundamentally, what we're talking about is we have created enough space that we can feel the world in new but yet familiar ways. Does that make sense?
You've created enough space that that it has a feeling and that you can actually engage that space. And
Yes.
then the world has a different feeling because you've engaged the space.
And it could have always had that. It could have had that from the day that we were born if we would have been, directed this direction of above the threshold of active recognition. It's not like we invent it, we're really even discover it, but we're coming back to the present moment and we're coming back to being able to perceive from it, because what are you
Absolutely. And I think in all going from basic alignment to counterbalance to warrior training to hydrostasy, in each phase, as you practice, as the practice starts to become familiar and the interference starts to dissolve, it feels like you're remembering something. To me, it felt like I was remembering something. I can remember brushes of feeling of this either from childhood or from before childhood, toddlerhood. So yes, all of it feels like remembering to me, even though it's new, feels new at the same time because it's always new. But the fact that it was always available, that it is always available, and my experience of it is what's unique. And the fact that those two things line up means that it's different all the time and it's new all the time. But the experience of remembering something that I've always had access to, it happens every time I get that feeling.
Yes. If anybody likes to take photography or you like art in any way, when you're walking down the street and the light is hitting the trees in such a way and you see the rays and your mind clears for a moment to take it in, that's what we're talking about. It's new because everything about that present moment is changing and moving, and it's already changed by the time your mind has created the composite picture of perception. So, but the feeling is also familiar because some of the most fundamental aspects of what it means to be a human being is still there. So we're still doing, in a sense, the same connecting mechanism that we always do. So we're actually starting to sense harmony. Two contextual opposites existing simultaneously as one, and kind of bouncing a little bit back and forth between them at times. So just for the sake of time, I want to get into that last layer. But first, in hydrostasy, we also deliberately intend how we feel. Now, I just want to clarify at this point, we are not using that in the redirection technique. I'm not trying to change how I feel, and I'm going to give an example. So let's see, what's a good example? Okay, so I took a test, and this was the final for the most important class, the most important class in our program in the beginning. I did my final, and I got an 87%. And I was immensely disappointed. All I felt was disappointment. So if I gave you some examples of how I would have interacted with that disappointment 20 years ago, I probably would have dropped out of the program. I mean, I would have done some stupid, I mean, maybe not that, but it would have been chaos, right? Now, for me, I don't want to change that feeling. The feeling already exists. I don't need to change it. Emotions are always changing. Everything is an ebb and flow. I'm just going to make damn sure that I don't think it into more suffering, more disharmony, labeling, judging,
You
comparing,
don't indulge it.
contrasting.
You're
I don't
aware
even
of
have
it,
to
you
indulge it.
accept it, but
I'm
you don't
aware of it.
indulge it.
Right. But at the same time, I know that I can't deliberately modulate to certain things because they're not really cohabitating right now. Does that make sense? And I don't even need to. I don't even, it's not important because I'm experiencing it. This is all about the journey. And then of course some thoughts come out of the ether and it's telling me exactly why I feel. I know exactly why I feel this way. I don't, because I have the emotional IQ and I'm not trying to blow myself up. I'm saying this is from Qigong. You'll have emotional IQ. You'll be aware of your behaviors. You'll create the space necessary for the knowing and the understanding of why this feels this way. So now you're able to actually discern and understand and communicate with yourself, not in words, but how you feel based on things. And of course, we've read this, the law of attraction, how you feel is an indicator, it's a signpost. Yes, but this isn't a meme anymore. You're experiencing it directly as a result of the Qigong practice.
And that's an example of know thyself.
And that's a perfect
Going
example
through
of
exactly what you just did. Not that
Yes.
you're going to be pristine, that how you navigate this is with a whole bunch of principles and some momentum behind it. Instead of reactionary.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then so what happened? So I continue to do my practice. Eventually, of course, the emotion changes. I'm less disappointed and everything is just moving along. The day is moving along, but I'm not trying to change things. I'm not constantly I'm not denying an emotion. I'm not suppressing an emotion. I'm not overemphasizing the emotion, which leads to attachment, exasperation in a direction that isn't going to make me feel good. I'm just going to let it be and let it move. This is what people say when we're processing, but typically we spiral into that feedback loop. Exactly, Lauren. Qigong Fa will interrupt that interference. That's a form of interference. And what is it interfering? Our ability to connect. We can't connect to the present moment with all of that cognitive interference. They basically create a degree that we're on one end of that spectrum or the other. We're getting so far away from presence because we're getting so under the threshold of active recognition, going back into those feedback loops, staying as peaceful as humanly possible, depending on where you're at in the practice throughout it all. And that involves the practice. It involves redirection, not coasting. I didn't just hope that my practice created enough residual effect that I can coast through this experience. No, I'm still doing my practice. And that's kind of what I'm illustrating, is that the basic alignment is still there. Counterbalance and warrior training are still there. And that's why these are layers of change. I haven't leveled up. I'm not a master of the universe necessarily, right? So, but then again, I am. There is a way to look at that. So I am feeling that feeling of disappointment. And then as things move on, I realized that that feeling of disappointment came from because I felt like I could have done better. I could have studied a little bit more. I could have, but I still didn't turn that into thoughts. It was just a feeling. I know that that's where that feeling came from, but I also have another final on Tuesday. So I know where the feeling came from. I learned through my experience that I don't care about the percentage. I don't care about the grade. It had everything to do with effort. I want to feel like I gave my best. And then that's it. That's all I can do. That's how I relax through everything, because all I can do is my best. And I have actually done my best. I put my impeccable best effort and stayed in balance. That doesn't mean violating principle and studying from the second I wake up to that's not balanced, right? That's not even going to prepare me for the test, because I'm not going to remember all that shit. I can't process all that into memory physically. I'm not Sherlock Holmes. I don't have eidetic memory. I got to actually work with the brain I was given. It
might even be counterproductive.
It would likely be counterproductive. So I stayed peaceful through it all. I recognized where the feeling came from. It came because I actually, maybe played a little too much Hogwarts a couple days before the test. And I was out, collecting herbs in a video game rather than maybe doing the exam or, studying for the exam that I should have studied for. But that learning was applied to my palpation final because I made sure that I didn't cut those corners, right? And I made sure that I gave my best effort. I planned how much I was going to study. I studied how I planned. I did my level best, and I'm going to learn, you know, if I can see some ways to improve throughout the process and throughout the day. Do you see how this is adaptation? This is learning from the moment. This is going with rather than against. And I got 100% on the palpation final, but if I had gotten an 82%, I would have been okay with that because I gave my best effort. And now maybe an idea will come to me on how to study differently or how to learn relative to this subject different than another subject, because not all subjects learn the same way. You don't learn the same way in every single subject. It could be different for others. Some I learn much better through video. Palpation, for example. I don't want to look at a book. I need to touch muscles and bones and veins, and I need to find that stuff. So I need some physical things, and I find videos and physical practice better than, but in terms of the foundations, I like reading that every morning for a couple hours. So you see how it's all different. It's adaptation, it's learning, it's growing, and that's a constant process for the rest of our lives. That is hydrostasy. Does that make sense? So I'm sensing energy, but I'm also choosing how I want to feel right at the beginning of the day because I have the space to do that. That's not, I feel sad, so I'm going to choose jubilation. No, it means I feel vibrant, alive, not good, not bad necessarily. I'm going to choose ... And hydrostasy will help set that up for you and make recommendations, such as choosing the feeling of appreciation, using death as your advisor. At first, it may have involved reminding yourself with words and note cards, and that can all still be there. It still probably should be there to a certain extent, and should in terms of the practice and its recommendations. But now we're just feeling that. You know, I can wake up in the morning and I just instantly, I can put my attention on the feeling of appreciation. Just like I can use my intention to raise my hand. I don't have to think about it. I just practiced it. I know how to do it now. It's like a muscle memory. Does that make sense? But I still maintain my sphere, my circle of balance. I don't want to deliberately modulate to an imbalance, because that can't be sustained, and then it's a farther swing when you end up going to something different. Okay, so that's hydrostasy. That's an extensive aspect of the practice. Now the abstract principles we start to get into, now this is pretty much all felt, the abstract principles, right? Because we're going to do what Qigong set out to do in the very beginning when it was created in ancient China, is to interact with energy directly. Now, this is also the point that some people will say this is woo-woo. Sorry, you know, if that's the way you think, I'm going to explain this in a very scientific way, a very experiential way where you can feel it for yourself and everything else. So you'll have empirical evidence, and I can give you historical evidence of ways that the mind can interact with its energy body. So we have a physical body, of course, we have a psychological body, we know all about that. The energy body is actually a mystery even to the people who talk about it. The more that they talk about it, in fact, the less that they're probably familiar with it directly. That's probably, I'm not going to judge individually, I don't know. But it's likely. So the energy body requires no thought. Of course, the energy body responds to thought. It responds to your actions. It responds to the food that you eat. It responds to the thoughts that you allow into your mind and that you project out of your mind. So it's involved in all of that. However, we're going to interact with energy directly using mind intention. That's it. And how do we do that? With attention. You direct your attention intentionally, and now your intention and your attention are overlapping, and you become a force of conscious creation. Does that make sense? And I have practices now that I can illuminate on how you can do this. So some of this will look like cultivating techniques where you're cultivating certain things. And what is cultivating? Going back to the foundations of the practice, going right back to the very beginning, with less words, albeit, there's much less words involved. But then again, you can have a catalyst in your life where you won't forget to redirect and go back to your beginning practice, because the abstract principles come full circle. In order to cultivate, where is that feeling that I want to cultivate now? Or do I even know? Maybe I want to cultivate, and when I create that hydrostasy pyramid, you become familiar with it so that you can cultivate it with just the feeling. You don't need the words, but I still recommend setting the reminders with words all around you, because you're just setting the chips in your favor. Nothing wrong with that. Is it necessary? Is it required? Maybe not, probably not, no, but who cares? I'm going to remind myself using an object of power to feel appreciation. I'm going to use a note card that says, feel appreciation. Maybe I don't need to look at that all day because I'm feeling it all day. That's cool too. But I'm going to prepare myself. I'm going to set myself up for, in air quotes, Igong success, because I'm going to come full round back to the practice. So let's say in the abstract principles, I am cultivating, and I'll go up from to the next one. So appreciation is the baseline, contentment. I want to cultivate the feeling, and we all know it. We've had brushes of contentment. Hell yeah, we love it. It's soothing. So the feeling of contentment, I want to go to the next aspect that I've been practicing in hydrostasy, and I want to embody it. I want to cultivate it. Well, whenever you're not feeling contentment, use the rule of 3 to go back to contentment. That's the exact same thing we've always been doing, and it just brings it full circle, but with feeling. And you're doing everything Abraham Hicks has ever written about. You are feeling your place in the universe. Thought reinforces that feeling, but it's the feeling that is the driving force for your conscious creation. And you're feeling it first before you ever try to create it with something outside of yourself. You don't need a vacation, because you can actually cultivate the vacation feeling. And then you feel like you're on vacation when you're at work, when you're at play, and then when you're on vacation. Because some people can't feel the vacation feeling even on vacation. Maybe they do for the first 30 minutes or when their plane actually lands, but then the moment that, the reality hits them of their itinerary, or that these kids won't shut up, or that it's muggy and humid in Florida right now, and yeah, so those things hit the person, and then they're gone. And then, as Lauren so eloquently put, they spiral into the feedback loop, complaining about the weather. That's a habit of complaining. Not just about the weather. They probably complain about every fucking thing under the sun that doesn't go their way exactly how they want it to, when they want it to. That is a closed feedback loop, and it's nothing short of insane. Does that make sense? So if I were, I don't know, let's say I was talking to my my acupuncturist, my Chinese medical doctor, and they said that you have this deficiency and you need to do these things. In a manner of speaking, that's a type of diagnosis, although I would never use that word. It's more about, these are the patterns we see right now. These are the indications. So we're going to counterbalance that with some techniques to help establish harmony, and your body will heal itself. Okay. Well, I don't need to think about trying to control, or I don't need to think about the fact that I am actually a temporary entity on this earth. I don't need to think about those things because I already know them. Why would I communicate this part of my brain with this part of my brain about shit I already know? I'm so far beyond that. Instead, I'm going to put myself in the position to maximize. I'm going to put myself in the position to feel as much quality as I can through this process of adaptation. And maybe I want to cultivate a particular feeling that's not on Ernest's list. It's an emotion, it's a vibration. You're also interacting with vibration directly. I don't know, you can see how that occurs, right? You're feeling, this is an emotion, it's a vibration. If you choose to feel something, you're deliberately modulating. You're choosing your vibrational frequency, if we want to talk about it that way. You're choosing your electrochemical, physiological, hormonal output, if you want to look at it that way. Does this all make sense? So if I was in that situation, which I am in a manner of speaking, you know, I had long COVID, and the long COVID interacted with my lungs in a certain way that made other aspects interact with other aspects in certain ways. So, you know, I have my thing that I don't think about it. You know, I'm not concerned with it necessarily. I just put myself in the position to allow my body to heal. And that is deliberately modulating and cultivating ... I'll give you some things that would be universal, most likely to all human beings, such as appreciation for this opportunity to exist. But you may have some on your own, some things that are a part of your experience that you want. That's why this is an artful exercise that we do, because it will have a lot of your individual characteristics that are still based under the same underlying principles. Now, what I have been cultivating most lately is, you know, just that one step up of contentment. I love the feeling of contentment. It's happiness. That's that Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm using his definition of happiness as being content, the ability to have or not have and still feel free. I can have money, not have money, win the lottery, not win the lottery. I could live here, I could live there, I could do this, I could do that, and I can still feel free. That feeling of freedom is that next little step up in the hydrostasy pyramid. That's what I cultivate. How do I cultivate that? Writing it down, having reminders, doing the exact same stuff I did at the beginning of the practice. Of course, it requires less thought, but I'm not ashamed of using thought in my rule of three if I need to. But what am I rule of threeing? Anytime that I don't feel freedom. Or if it's a different thing for you, maybe you back it down to appreciation for this opportunity to exist. Now, what's really great is that you're interacting with the energy body directly, and the energy body doesn't feel pain. So even when you're sick, even when you don't feel well, and yes, I've tested this when I'm sick and when I don't feel well, I'm still able to cultivate something. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's so monumentally useful to practice when you feel at your worst, whatever, however you judge what your worst is. Pain usually is one of those, or sick. In your body, feeling is distractible. It's distracting, and it's easy to say, well, I can't practice now because this is loud. But if you do, if you have enough momentum and intention, and it's accessible, and you do practice it, it's really informative, and it creates it allows you to embrace the space. And when you do that in the midst of what would previously appear as impossible at a time that you would think it would be impossible or normal not to do so, it gives you access. It informs you to a way of existing that is that has been formally atrophied as a result of existing below a threshold of recognition of that awareness. It's an expanded awareness that's informs you of how much space you have to engage. If that makes any sense. I know it sounds very woo-woo, but that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. No, it definitely makes sense. So, you know, this aspect of the practice, I'll give just like a quick example again. Let's say, you know, I use this example because most of us have pets and we can relate to this. But at some point, my dog is going to transition out of his physical existence. He will disperse, and I will have an emotional reaction to that. I will not try to change that with deliberately modulating to yada, yada, yada. Do you see that's not how this works? That's not how adaptation works. I'm not going to try to just deny the emotion that I feel and just, no, Abraham says I should be on the high flying disc. I'm just going to put my head in the sand and pretend that this isn't happening. It's not in my truth. Well, no, you're feeling an emotion. It exists. Electrochemical, physiological, energetic, vibrational stuff is happening. And just trying to change that is a form of manipulation and control, and is actually another habit that we have gotten into, rather than letting alignment occur on its own as a result of non-interference. So all I want to do is make sure that I'm not interfering. I feel that way, probably devastated because he's a furry fucker and I like him a lot. So I'll feel very devastated when my dog transitions to something new. That's not going to transition into long-term psychological suffering or disharmony. It's an extreme that I'm allowed to exist in right now, knowing that it will pull back naturally because of my practice, but I'll still be practicing even in the midst of the
Right, you'll still be practicing. So the awareness of the high flying disc, or whatever you want to call it, the awareness of that space, and the totality, the degree to which you embrace it always exists. And so that in itself is a balance, is a form of balance, because you are acknowledging that you have an attachment and this is the reaction that you're going to have, but everything else doesn't disappear because of it.
right. And let's say it's so intense of an emotion though, Donna, it does disappear for a second. That's okay, because I have techniques to go back to basic alignment, back to redirection.
That's like remembering and forgetting.
It's
Every
remembering and
remembers a
forgetting.
win.
Absolutely. And since we have no images of perfection, I wouldn't judge Donna if she had a moment where she forgot her practice. But Donna, you're in hydrostasy. You're a black belt. Like, what's going on? There's no belts. I'm just teasing. So you can see also how Igong, the way that I have set the system up, just shatters all that bullshit. Like, we can just cut that bullshit out right now. There's no such thing as easy enlightenment. Leveling up is usually just something someone's talking about based on some sort of idea that they have that they think is clever. Or not. Maybe it's slow. I don't know. Shit. Who knows? Like, I can't even imagine caring. Now, the last layer doesn't have quite its name, but this is actually where I start to merge Igong with the rest of traditional Chinese medicine using intention directly. So this will be a way for you to use like points, and it's all specific technique to help you create more of that flow, because you're feeling flow now. So there's a certain point in this practice where you start to feel energy directly. You start to feel qi. What the Chinese would say takes 10 years of daily practice for 7 hours a day, we've done in a much shorter time through embodying Igong. Most likely much shorter.
I don't know. It's been almost 7 years, hasn't it?
It has.
No,
I would say that you've made, like, you know, it's not like you're not getting it after 7 years, you know what I mean? Yeah. So in that layer, and I don't have it quite named or anything, but this is what Igong was intended for by the Chinese, which is to be able to move your qi, move your energy, not because you're trying to change something. It's the direction of your attention. And so that's yours. It's all about a know yourself. It's you. You're just deciding where you want to go. That's your right as an entity, is to decide which direction you choose. That's a part of choice, infinite direction that you can go, and you get to go which direction you want to go. That's not my choice to make for you. That would be weird. That's what religions want to do for you. And that's fine if you're religious, but that's just not Igong. It does. That's why Igong can be compatible with a religion, because it's non-religious in every shape and way. Like, and I don't even really like using the word spiritual because of the way the concept that's wrapped around that in the West. I use it very differently. But if we did use the word spirit, you could imagine yourself a lot like maybe the stories of those Native Americans, or excuse me, indigenous people to what is now what is now North America. But the indigenous people and just people of antiquity, they had more of a keen connection and feeling to how everything moves. That's how they made these observations in the first place. So when Qigong was put together as two words by the Chinese, whenever, they were intending a human being to learn to use their intention to interact with their qi, with the flow of their energy. Now, what that could look like eventually is you will notice when things aren't flowing. You don't necessarily need your Chinese medical doctor to, they can confirm it for you or tell you more about it, but you'll be able to notice everything as it's occurring. You'll be able to notice these imbalances, and that leads to better health. It leads to more lasting, meaningful, better relationships and connection to the world around you. It allows us to learn, it allows us to grow, it allows us to evolve. And ultimately, in hydrostasy, we have that thing that I call the capstone. One aspect of that capstone is feeling and recognizing in the moment your connection to all things. Like you feel that connection, and guess what? In the next layer of change, you can cultivate that. And anytime you're not feeling that, redirect back to it. And if that feels hard, then just back your practice up a little bit, because that's not where we should be right now if it feels like force or trying to control. It's if it doesn't feel natural, then maybe take a look and the space isn't actually there. This is creating from the space. So if the space ain't there, it ain't there. You're not doing it. Like it's different. Does that make sense? So if I say, Donna, do you have an active point of attention? And she says, no, there's no way, shape or form in any way that she's doing the counter or the hydrostasy or abstract principles. Because there's no space. So it's like, you're not creating your space. Like, what are you doing? Any questions? That is the Qigong system. And then at the end of the Qigong system, you are interacting with energy directly. You may not understand Chinese medicine because that's not what the next layer is going to do, but you will be able to interact with your own energy system, Qi, Yin, and Yang. And you'll be able to do that with your attention. And it doesn't mean that you're never going to get out of balance. It just means that you're very likely going to be able to counterbalance quicker, more efficiently, and better than you ever did before. Because you're still going to disperse. So that's still going to happen. But how we navigate that disperse and the coming together, the congregation, we have dispersion and starts with the C. It's not congregation. It's not congealing, although that's an example of it. What is the word I was using? It's in Machioch's book of Chinese men. I'll go look at that.
Assimilation?
No, assimilate is what my cat wants to do. She's always trying to assimilate us. I'll explain that later. That's what cats do. They try to assimilate you into their pack. No, it's aggregation or congregation. No. Oh shit, I got the book right here. Aggregation or dispersal. Aggregation. Yeah. Energy is either in one form or another of aggregation or dispersion. Yeah, found it.
All right, what's that in layman's term?
That means things are either solid physical matter or they are less tangible, more refined forms of energy. If you look at that as E equals MC squared, or even in more layman terms, this physical is aggregation. The
Okay.
molecules have come together into something physical and solid. But when you look out in space, things have dispersed, but there's still stuff there. It's just more spread out.
That's based on the principle of energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just
Right.
changes form.
Right.
It's all energy.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
it's either aggregated energy or it's dispersed energy. Energy is, you can cultivate energy, but you're just bringing together what already exists.
Yes.
You're aggregating it, or you're dispersing it, and you're aware of those things. But that's like even human existence. The concept is transition from here isn't, it's only this form that changes,
Does that
because you
make
can't destroy energy.
So your life right now, as you exist as Santina, is the congregation, the coming together. And then there is a certain point where our body can no longer sustain our consciousness for whatever reason, and then everything starts to disperse. In the Bible, that is returned to dust.
Mhm. And in this aggregation, is that what you said? In
Aggregation,
this
yep.
coming together,
Yep.
that can always change. That can always be in the constant form of changing. Our
Yes,
bodies change, our cells change,
yes.
right?
Yep. And you could look at that as like another degree, like a gradient, you know,
Mhm.
and there's actually no end to the gradient because the electromagnetic spectrum is it's infinite. There's no
Mhm.
such thing as size. You know, the more that we get into, the more we can magnify, the more we realize, holy shit, this universe is absolutely enormous. Every single cell. So you have 40 trillion human cells. Science textbooks say, biological textbooks say that, like, if you were to do a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and go inside of a cell, it would look like the most lit up city you've ever been in. It would be full of activity. There would be everything everywhere, depending on your size. And that's in every single of your 40 billion cells. And then,
Amazing.
yeah, and then you have the organelles inside the cells. And
Mhm.
inside the organelles are more organelles. And it's like, in a manner of speaking, and it's like, inside of every cell are little things that have a bunch of shit going on inside of it, and that has a bunch of shit going on inside of it. And so size is just another one of those things that are, it's a relative thing.
It's like Horton Hears a Who. You know that book
Yeah.
from Dr. Seuss?
Yeah.
Oh, Horton is a character, a being of some kind, and he has a little like dandelionish flower, and he thinks he hears something, and then there's a whole like each pollen thing is a
Oh
planet,
yes, yeah.
and it's yeah.
I
So
don't know that story, but yeah.
it's the children's version of what you just said.
Mhm. Did you ever see Men in Black? At the end of the movie, there's an alien playing with universes. There's little toys, and inside are like a complete universe, and then there's this kid playing with it, and then it expands, and then that's another universe, and then there's another child playing with that. Yeah.
Right, and the whole idea behind that is identifying as self and others is
Mhm.
kind of silly when we're stuck in below the threshold of recognition, and we are the center of the universe is so extremely ridiculous
Mhm.
in terms of awareness. And you can also get lost in that concept that you just described of awareness. So that's why we can deliberately modulate to any part of it.
Right. And then real quick before we go, here's a technique. So I'll offer a specific technique that's inside of the abstract principles. And the abstract principles are interacting.
So this is a
Energy
technique
directly.
for cultivating.
This is a technique for cultivating, and you could try it, or maybe this isn't the one you like, and that's okay too. I'm going to try to draw it out here. I've never drawn this out before, so if I have to do it a second time. You can think of this like a gradient as well. This is kind of I'll draw a line, and this is 2 degrees, but it has an infinite type of scope. I'm talking about something infinite on a finite piece of paper using finite language, so ultimately it still looks kind of finite. But so this middle line is what I have established as contentment, or just being content, happy. And that will be the anchor. I must feel that. Remember, we're talking about the abstract principles. So if I need to counterbalance, it's probably not going to be happy, right? Because my dog just died or something. I'm not happy. So this technique is inaccessible in that example, and that's okay. I would just use my practice to work myself back. So ideally, I want to stay here on the continuum at all times, while simultaneously going back between these two forms of how do we want to talk about this? Emotional energy. How do you want to talk?
Awareness between those two places of awareness, attention.
Okay, so you can be aware of. And I'm using words to help a person understand the feeling. So they're very simple words. We don't have to get too much into but it's to help this, and I'll show you this. Okay, so these are different. These are different feelings. These are different emotions that we feel, different vibrational things that we feel. They feel different. They feel almost like a yin and yang pairing. Soothing is, and again, you know, there's some variation because we all experience the universe in a unique way, but we could say that soothing is more of like a, ah. See how that sound is going down? It's getting deeper. It seems like it's like going into the floor and into my feet when I do that. Let's say I have a burn and I put some of that cream on it and it's just like, ah, that's soothing. Or let's say there's no pain, but I rub the area and it's like, oh, ah, that's soothing. Who likes that feeling? So maybe a baby, when you're holding a baby, they don't necessarily have to be crying for you to soothe them. But of course, if they are crying, then you can soothe them. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is an electrochemical physiological. Let's just talk about it in a little woo-woo-ish. This is a vibration, or as Donna said, this is our intention. Like we want to intend this feeling because we know what it feels like. Who here doesn't know what soothing feels like?
Want to point your flashlight of attention there.
There, yep. And it's called deliberate modulation. You are deliberately modulating to soothing with one little eye still on content and happy. Does that make sense? Not going away from content and happy. That's my anchor. Doesn't it make sense in your life to let happiness be your anchor? Yeah. Now, refreshing, that's a different feeling. And we even talk about it different, and it has a different sound when we, doesn't that feel like it's like a bottle that you're opening up or something, and like the air is going out and up? It's like, you know what? I'm gonna put these two. It makes more sense to have soothing below then, and refreshing. Now, the reason I'm using these words is because every single person has felt this. Who here hasn't felt refreshed? Maybe you are running, and I almost said running for some reason. So maybe you're running for whatever reason that you think is appropriate to run, and you're all hot and sweaty, and then you take a refreshing shower. That's refreshing. You're really thirsty and you get that drink of refreshing water. But do you see how these are kind of slightly different feelings and emotions? They're kind of going to, it's a little bit of a yin and yang pair. Refreshing is up and out and like feels good. But it's more of like energy up, energy out. You walk outside, that air hits you, and everything just feels like it's expanding. Have you ever felt that like in the fall when you're going from summer mugginess and you get that first day of, especially in the Midwest, it's more of a thing in the Midwest, when you get that first 70 or 65-degree day and it's crisp air and it's not hot and muggy and you're like, whoo, I can breathe better. Everything just feels so refreshed. Think of 7-Up, even though I don't drink 7-Up and it's probably the opposite of refreshing to me, but their commercials, that's what they're trying to emphasize, is the refreshment. It's funny when beer commercials do that, because I have never in my entire life found a beer refreshing. Maybe soothing, because I had, you know, some psychological shit going on and the beer kind of soothed that. So in this particular technique, throughout the day, all day, you would be aware of contentment because you've cultivated that and you're cultivating that. And you're bouncing back and forth how you see fit between refreshing and soothing. Our world today really focuses on soothing for a lot of obvious reasons. But in most of the time in healthy ways, we're not really focusing on refreshment.
Soothing is kind of like relief.
Relief.
And relief is what we feel early in the practice when we start reducing the overall volume of thought.
Yeah.
Because the thought is interference, and you feel soothed from less interference. But I think what you're talking about is when you've already achieved a state where happiness is an anchor and you're aware of that, its existence,
yes,
and your access to it, and you're just choosing to move between. This technique is choosing to move between different aspects of contentment.
Yes. And also it's a yin and yang pairing, because one is kind of up, one is kind of down. We can look at yin and yang arbitrary, but I would put refreshing as yang and soothing as yin. But now how can we use this throughout our day? Maybe when we first wake up, we want to feel more refreshed. We want our energy more moving, because refreshing and everything out and expanding, that's how it's going to feel. That's great at the beginning of the day, right? Because you have things to do. Maybe you have a job, maybe you're a full-time student and have a job, and all of these different things. So that's what you could modulate to, using contentment as your anchor. But let's say you're getting towards the later half of the day, and you've been moving a lot and you've been adapting a lot, and now you kind of want your energy to relax a little bit. And so you're going to move more towards and modulate more towards that soothing. Today's the end of the day. I'm going to rub my feet. Everything is okay. I can just relax and allow myself to drift off into the relaxing evening. Does that make sense? So you can actually deliberately modulate. And this is actually what will be really important in the next layer of change, is that we actually start to deliberately modulate to specifically adapt. Not force, not control, adapt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. When you asked the question earlier, if I could come down and say, you know, where are your points of attention right now? And somebody would answer on engaging the space, that would be great. And I didn't volunteer because it sounded woo-woo what I was going to say. But I do something similarly, but because I have used imagination, for lack of a better term, with my chakra system. So I use the rooting, the spiral connection to the center of the earth as the rooting thing, earthing, and the crown chakra, and I also use the throat chakra one. I see them as refreshing and soothing. You know, this one is more refreshing. This one, the rooting one, is more soothing, being grounded, as opposed to, because that's where I find my subtle imbalances to be, is up here or down here, and I don't want to be in any one place. I want to be in a balanced place, which is dynamic, of course. So I use the chakras. So that if you were to drop down and ask me where you are, I would feel it. It would be hard to make words for it, because I would be doing one of those energetic things, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that is a great example of taking a principle and a technique that I've offered and making it your own. Because you may have all kinds of things that you have experienced. That's your deliberate modulation. You felt that. Maybe that's completely foreign to me. Like maybe I'd never even heard of the word chakras before. I don't even know what Donna's talking about. I do, but let's just say I don't. That's okay. I get what she's saying. I don't have to understand completely, because it's her feeling, her vibration, her experience in relation to those things. And that's why this practice is more of an art.
Right. That's why. And then when you say to join, stick, adhere, connect, I do that from my heart chakra and from my, I do that. I try to visualize the energy, and with color, with, all of that, because it's accessible to me, and it doesn't have words, and so it works.
Yeah. And when you read the Qigong books, those are techniques that are recommended, because bridge is the bridge between physical and the energy body is imagination. Well, it's a bridge that we need now because of what we've done to ourselves, which is interference for decades, irrational behavior, etc. So what it will kind of look like.
So are you saying that cultivating is the engaging the energy body?
It is. And you're
with
cultivating
technique.
With technique, and you're cultivating something specific. And you can do it for whatever reasons.
Is this the same energy body that Eckhart Tolle talks about?
We're all talking about the same thing.
Same thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody's talking about the same thing. Just when you talk about the same thing from a different culture and a different language, you end up with different concepts and different
Yes.
everything. And it all seems so different, but yeah, we're really all just talking about the same stuff. It is the aspect of the body that is currently, we just don't have instrumentation to, well, we do have some now, but we don't fully have, we'll never have instrumentation to be able to show it in a two-dimensional way. But we know that there is, if we were talking to a skeptic, the heart is electrical. Like there, you need an EED to get the heart going again. You know, you can beat on someone's chest as much as you want to. Chances are they're not going to be revived by that. You have to have electricity. We know that matter itself creates an electromagnetic field. We're a lot of matter. There's a lot, even though we're 80% or something empty space, that's a relative term. But we still have 40 trillion human cells, each with anywhere from 2 to 100 mitochondria, which is creating chemical energy. There's energy permeating all throughout our body in ways that we don't know a lot about yet. We're learning constantly, and that will always be a continuous process.
I like the fact that you call this practice an art, because it allows you to make it your own at
Yes,
the same time.
absolutely. It would violate principle if it didn't, because then it's now you trying to recreate
Right.
something else. And that's actually, and again, if somebody is religious, I don't mean to offend with this, but this is how some people act out their religion, is trying to imitate an image, and usually it's this image of perfection that's being held over the religion. You must be this, otherwise you are wrong, you are sinful, you are damaged.
Yeah.
And that's fine for the religion, but that's not a part of the Igong system. Well, good questions though. Yeah. So this practice will have 6 core books. There'll be setup books, peripheral books that kind of set up. They're all Igong books, but they kind of just lend to, like the treatise on thought. That's not one of the core books because it doesn't offer a lot of technique. It's one of those books that somebody may find useful because it's like they may not understand that the sheer volume of thought from the time that they wake up, from the time that they go to bed, is wildly out of balance. They may have never even considered that. So that's what that book would be for. But hopefully by the end of the year, I'll have at least the first 5 books of Igong in print, PDF for you all. You can buy them in print if that's your thing, but you can have them for free too, because you're doing the practice. So I want you to have it. It's not about, that's obviously this isn't about making money. So I'll give you the books in PDF. I don't own a printing press, so I can't send you books for free. Maybe someday I'll have enough money that I can just put them in libraries. I don't know. Or they'll just end up in libraries and I didn't need to do that. So there's so much possibility. I don't give that a lot of thought or attention, but so we'll have it's a structured practice. It's not psychotherapy. It's not infringing on professions of other types. It is literally doing one thing: directing your attention above the threshold of active recognition as often as you can remember, eventually all of the time. That's it. And then let's say somebody wanted to do Yang Sheng, which is basically life coaching of traditional Chinese medicine. It's not life coaching, it's a lifestyle of traditional Chinese medicine where you interject balance and harmony into all of these little bits of your daily life, brushing your teeth, taking a shower. Yang Sheng offers things that a person can do that are very holistic, and that's so much easier with Igong. It's so much easier to correct an imbalance in your body and in your energy body with Igong. So Igong will make every type of therapy under the sun easier and better and last longer and more beneficial. So I don't see a lot of contraindications to Igong if practiced the way that it's recommended. Does that make sense? So if somebody was seeing a therapist, I would tell them to see their therapist. If they're seeing an American doctor an American doctor, I would tell them, you see your American doctor. I'm not going to tell you what you should or should not do. If you ask me what I do, I'll tell you what I do and I'll tell you why. But otherwise, it's not my place. But Igong can still be offered with all of that. Yeah.
I have an observation.
One second.